Portable TV. Come watch with me. Hey, welcome back. I'm Rick Sanchez. We recently told you about, no, we showed you actually the verbal sparring between Chinese officials and U.S. officials as it happened. Well, it's happened again. This time it's happening between U.S. officials and Russian officials as they face off on the humanitarian crisis in Syria. Who's responsible for it? Who's better able to help solve the situation, and how? That's a big part of the argument. And here's RT correspondent Alex Mihailovich with the story.
Life has gotten worse for many people in Syria, a point that both the U.S. and Russia agreed upon at a virtual meeting of the United Nations Security Council on Monday.
We estimate that 13.4 million people across all parts of Syria require humanitarian aid, 20% more than last year.
Even with the decade-long conflict calming down in Syria over the past year due to a deal between Russia and Turkey, a deepening economic crisis along with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic have created a concerning humanitarian situation in the country. With both the United States and Russia active in Syria, the two butted heads at the Security Council session when discussing solutions. The U.S. is pushing for the reopening of border crossings to deliver aid into Syria, primarily to areas held by rebel forces.
The lives of people in Syria depend on getting urgent help. We have to do everything in our power to create ways for that aid to get to them, to open pathways, not to close them. The members of this council have a job to do. Reauthorize all 3 border crossings for humanitarian assistance to the Syrian people.
Russia, along with China, vetoed measures to reauthorize crossings through Bab al-Salam and al-Yarubiyah back in July 2020. Bab al-Hawa remains open. The concern is that the cross-border aid initiative infringes on the sovereignty of the Syrian government and allows for the possibility of more than just aid reaching rebel parts of the country, an idea that some have dismissed.
The UN cross-border operation is one of the most heavily scrutinized and monitored aid operations in the world. That is because the people paying for it, who are mostly Western and Gulf donors, have been clear that they will only do so if they are sure the resources are not being diverted to terrorist groups.
However, some argue that the same donor states are the ones who have supplied terror groups in Syria with weapons over the past decade. To stabilize Syria, Russia is proposing that all aid go through Damascus, giving the Syrian government control of the situation within its own borders. Moscow is also criticizing American sanctions against Syria and the pillaging of resources in U.S.-controlled areas for contributing to the humanitarian crisis.
We're still receiving information that American convoys carry oil and grain out of Syria into Iraq every day. On the 23rd of March alone, according to information that we received, 300 oil trucks crossed the Syrian-Iraq border, and more than 200 lorries with grain have done so since the start of the month.
While both Russia and the U.S. are pushing the idea of people over politics, the solutions they are proposing are very different. However, while they might not agree on how, both recognize that something needs to be done soon to help Syrians in need. For RT, I'm Alex Mihailovich.